The dominant direction since the heyday of abstract expressionism has not been abstract painting. There were, however, a small group of painters that came along in the later 50s and early 60s that created an abstract painting of equal force and equal power to that of the best of abstract expressionism, but which is very different in character. Its posture is not romantic, its method is not improvisational. It's a kind of more classical, more controlled art that, in a certain sense, reacted against the action conception of abstract expressionism and against what by the late 50s had come to be a great deal of very bad painting made in abstract expressionism's name.
It seemed to me that the action painters, and particularly the second generation action painters, adopted an attitude towards painting which was based a lot on an idea of all-over attack, but that they were inconsistent. They didn't really carry it out. In other words, it was supposed to be an all-over painting, but it ended up in working with a kind of, or it seemed to me, too much of a conventional push-pull. The other big thing was, as far as I was concerned, that they almost all seemed to get in trouble in the corners. They always started out with a big, expansive gesture, and then they ended up fiddling around or trying to make that one explosive gesture work on the canvas in some kind of way. And it seemed to me, basically, in sort of painting in energy terms, finally compromised by all of the fixing up that went around the supposedly loose and free explosive images. I mean, we've got to be more an illustration of energy than an establishment of real pictorial energy. I didn't want that. I wanted to be able to have what I think were some of the virtues of abstract expressionism, but still have them under a kind of control, but not control for its own sake, a kind of conceptual, painterly control that I felt made the pictures, or would make even stronger pictures. I wanted to make my pictures at least stronger, what I was doing. The business about my work being unfeeling and being cold and intellectual, I mean, I can't quite explain it. I mean, I think the only explanation I can make is a biographical one. Certainly no one would see the black paintings now as kind of cold and calculating or very logical, but they seem to seem that way in the context of 59 and 60. They were lean compared to some paintings about, but the general look of them, I mean, if you really looked at it, it seemed to me that they had an awful lot to do with somebody like Rothko and the general feeling of it, and no one accused Rothko of being cold and intellectual. There were certain literary things that were in the air that corresponded to it. I mean, at the time I was going into to school, for example, Beckett was very popular, and I mean, it's not I mean, Beckett is pretty lean, I guess you might say, but also slightly repetitive to me in the sense that certain very simple situations in which not much happens are a lot like repetition. Through the use of a kind of flat, regulated pattern, I could make a painting situation that read or seemed flatter, and I felt that that flatness was a kind of just an absolute necessity for modernist painting at the time. And I mean, I felt the black paintings were really right. I mean, there were a lot of things in those paintings that were not in anybody else's paintings at the time, and it seemed to me that there were concerns that painting, in a way, had to address itself too. I got very involved at that time with the black paintings with pattern, and I began making little drawings and sketches, and in some of the sketches I got involved with patterns that traveled. They would move and make a jog in them, and I had this kind of slightly shaped or notched format. And the more I looked at it, the more I liked it, and that's the way I built the stretches and painted the series. And that was the beginning, I guess, of shaping, for me at least. Then I already had an idea for the kind of paint that I wanted to use. I was interested in this metallic paint, particularly aluminum paint, something that would sort of seize the surface, that it would be also probably fairly repellent. I like the idea, thinking about flatness and depth, that these would be very hard paintings to penetrate. All of the action would be on the surface. the idea was to keep the viewer from reading a painting. I mean, it seemed to me that you had to have some kind of way of addressing yourself to the viewer which wasn't so much of an invitation as it was a presentation. In other words, I made something and then it was available for people to look at, but it wasn't an invitation for them to explore, and it wasn't an invitation for them to read a record of what I had done exactly. In fact, I think one of the things you could say about my paintings, which I think is probably a good thing, it's not immediately apparent how they're done, in a way. I mean, you can say that it's finely brushed or it's sprayed or this, that, and the other, but the first thing you do is see it, I think, and not see how it was done. And it's not a particular record of anything. I mean, and that may explain in some kind of way its unpopularity with the critics. When I said make it hard for the critics to write about, I mean, there's not that much for them to describe. First of all, basically it's a simple situation visually, and the painting doesn't do that much in conventional terms. They can't explain to you how one part relates to another. I mean, basically what they're after is that it's too easy for me, so therefore it couldn't be any good. He's saying there's no suffering, there's no this, there's no feeling, there's no questioning. I just keep doing it, and I don't have troubled periods. I don't have crises and anxiety and all of that are documented on the canvas. There's a tremendous assumption of artistic humility, which I didn't seem to have. One, too much success, and also being essentially too smug about it in some kind of way. There's nothing in descriptive terms for them to say. I mean, or to point out something that you, the viewer, might have missed if you were slightly untrained or not so used to looking at paintings. That critical function is subverted. I mean, I don't think that that's a big accomplishment, but I think that on the positive side, and this again becomes suddenly, or not so suddenly, but does become very subjective, but has to do with finally both the quality and the value of the painting. If this presents a kind of visual experience to you that's really convincing, I think it can also be a moving experience. In other words, that apprehension, confrontation with the picture, that kind of visual impact, that kind of stamping out of an image, and that kind of sense of painted surface being really its own surface. And I think it was a kind of attempt to give the painting a particular life of its own in relationship to the viewer. I've always, I guess, thought in terms of pictorial structure or organization. Later on, with the more eccentrically shaped pictures, color just became, I don't know, inevitable in a certain kind of way. If they weren't multicolored, then they'd have to be monochromatic, and that would leave only a linear structure. And that's not what those paintings were about. I mean, they weren't conceived to be that way. This is one of the recent paintings, and the edges here are actually fairly hard. I mean, they're not soft at all. There's not much bleed in this, in a combination of fluorescent, water-soluble fluorescent, and Lenny Beaucourt's Aquatech. And you probably can't see the pencil line, but it's the same. It's drawn out on the canvas first and then taped over the line. This is part of the Saskatchewan series. The circular protractors made to fit into rectangular formats. This is one going up here, but you don't see the other half. Another one coming through from the outside. One, you see pretty much the whole blue one there, and then one coming up from the other way. I start with a drawing, usually a rough drawing, in which I plot out mainly how the bands are going to intersect. Once I know the width of the band, once I've decided that, then everything else falls into place.
How are the marks themselves?
Yeah, the drawing is done from points, and it's done with a beam compass, which I make myself out of lattice, and I punch a hole in the wooden lattice and use a pencil and nail at the other end, and I draw the pencil lines on the unsized canvas. I then use masking tape, which I tape over the line. Once the tape is down, it's ready to paint, and the tape is pulled afterwards. And the color here is Well, it's intuitive or arbitrary, or a combination of both. And what I'm really interested in terms of the color here is not so much in the interlacing, but rather I'm interested in using the curve to make the color travel. With the interlacing, particularly in a picture like this, there's no question that you have some illusionism and some kind of figure-ground relationships. What keeps the push-pull from defeating the picture, what I think keeps it on the surface, is the feeling that the colors move, that they follow the bands, that they have a sense of direction. And it's the directional sense of the color, I think, that holds the surface for the painting.